Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Chicago 2002 Movie Review. Chicago is a 2002 musical black comedy crime film based on the 1975 stage musical, which in turn originated in the 1926 play. It explores the themes of celebrity, scandal, and corruption in Chicago during the Jazz Age. The film stars an ensemble cast led by Renée Zellweger, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Richard Gere. Chicago centers on Roxy Hart, Zellweger, and Velma Kelly, Zeta-Jones, two murderers who find themselves in jail together awaiting trial in 1920s Chicago. Roxy, a housewife, and Velma, a vaudevillian, fight for the fame that will keep them from the gallows. The film marks the feature directorial debut of Rob Marshall, who also choreographed the film, and was adapted by screenwriter Bill Condon, with music by John Kander and lyrics by Fred Ebb. Chicago received critical acclaim, with particular praise for the performances of the cast. The film went on to win 6 Academy Awards in 2003, including Best Picture, making it the first musical to win Best Picture since Oliver! In 1968. For her performance, Zeta-Jones won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, the British Academy Film Award for Best Actress in a Supporting Role, and the Critics' Choice Movie Award for Best Supporting Actress. Zellweger won the Golden Globe Award for Best Actress, Motion Picture Comedy or Musical, and Gere won the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor, Motion Picture Musical or Comedy. Chicago was the 10th highest-grossing film of the year domestically in the United States. In 1924, vaudeville star Velma Kelly performs Overture/All That Jazz at the Onyx, a Chicago nightclub. The spotlight highlights the empty place where Velma's sister is missing awkwardly from the double act. Seeking stardom, housewife Roxy Hart watches Velma perform as she awaits furniture salesman Fred Casely, with whom Roxy is having an affair because he promised to introduce her to the nightclub's manager. After the show, Velma is arrested for killing her husband and sister, who she had caught in bed together. Roxy is disappointed when Casely fails to introduce her to the Onyx manager. A month later, Casely admits to Roxy that he lied about his connections to sleep with her but is now tired of the affair. Enraged, she shoots him dead. She convinces her gullible husband, Amos, to take the blame, telling him she killed a burglar in self-defense. However, when evidence of Roxy's infidelity is uncovered, Amos recants and tells the police that Casely was dead when he arrived home. Funny honey. Roxy is arrested, with District Attorney Martin Harrison declaring she faces execution by hanging. At the Cook County Jail, Roxy is sent to Murderous Row, supervised by the corrupt matron Mama Morton. When you're good to Mama. Roxy learns the backstories of the other women there, including her idol, Velma, Cell Block Tango, who rebuffs her attempts at friendship. On Morton's advice, Roxy engages Velma's lawyer, the brilliant Billy Flynn, all I care about. Flynn and Roxy manipulate the press, reinventing Roxy as a virtuous Southern woman corrupted by the city's decadent nightlife. A repentant Roxy claims she had the affair with Casely because Amos neglected her for work, but Casely jealously attacked her when she chose to remain with Amos. We both reached for the gun. The press extols the story, and Roxy becomes an overnight sensation. Roxy, praised by the public as a tragic heroine. Unhappy at losing the public's attention, Velma tries to convince Roxy to join her act, replacing her murdered sister. I can't do it alone. Now the more popular of the two rivals, Roxy snubs her. When wealthy heiress Kitty Baxter is arrested for murdering her husband and his 2 mistresses, the press and Flynn instantly shift their focus to her. To Velma's exasperation, Roxy quickly regains the spotlight by claiming pregnancy. The press ignores Amos, Mr. Cellophane. To generate more sympathy for Roxy, Flynn convinces Amos that the child is Casely's and that he should divorce Roxy in her predicament. Roxy decides to fire Flynn, believing she can now win on her own. However, when Katalin Helinski, a Hungarian woman on Murderous Row, the only inmate who insists on her own innocence, becomes the first woman in Cook County history to be executed by hanging, Roxy realizes the gravity of the situation and rehires Flynn. Flynn turns Roxy's trial into a media spectacle, razzle-dazzle, with the help of sensationalist newspaper reporters and radio personality Mary Sunshine. Flynn discredits witnesses, manipulates evidence, and even stages a public reconciliation between Amos and Roxy when she claims the child is his. Mama and Velma find Roxy's diary, containing incriminating entries, and offer it to the prosecution as evidence in exchange for amnesty in Velma's own case. Flynn discredits the diary, implying from its legalistic language that it was written by De Harrison, who planted it as evidence, a tap dance. Though Roxy is acquitted, her fame is eclipsed moments later when another woman who shot her husband shoots her own lawyer outside the courthouse. Flynn admits to Roxy that he tampered with her diary himself to incriminate the DA and to free his two clients simultaneously. Loyal Amos is excited to be a father, but Roxy cruelly reveals that she faked her pregnancy. Roxy pursues a vaudeville career with limited success, nowadays. The similarly unsuccessful Velma approaches Roxy to suggest performing together as a novel double act featuring two murder essays. Though initially refusing, Roxy accepts when Velma points out that they can perform together despite their mutual dislike. The two stage a spectacular performance, nowadays /Hot Honey Rag, receiving a standing ovation from an enthusiastic audience that includes Flynn, Morton, the jurors, and other acquitted murder essays. The film is based on the 1975 Broadway musical of the same name, which ran for 936 performances. A film adaptation of Chicago was to have been the next project for Bob Fosse, who had directed and choreographed the original 1975 Broadway production and had won an Oscar for his direction of the film version of Cabaret, 1972. Although he died before realizing his version, Fosse's distinctive jazz choreography style is evident throughout the 2002 film, and he is thanked in the credits. The minimalist 1996 revival of the musical proved far more successful, having played more than 10,601 performances, as of December 3, 2023, holding records for longest-running musical revival, longest-running American musical on Broadway and second longest-running show in Broadway history. Its runaway success sparked a greater appreciation of the 1975 original production and renewed stalled interest in a long-anticipated film, which incorporates the influences of both productions. The original production's musical numbers were staged as vaudeville acts. The film respects this but presents them as cutaway scenes in the mind of the Roxy character, while scenes in real life are filmed with a hard-edged grittiness. The musical itself was based on a 1926 Broadway play by Maureen Dallas Watkins, a journalist who had found her inspiration in two real-life Chicago trials she had covered for the press, about two real-life jazz-era murderers Beulah Annan, Roxy Hart, and Belva Gaertner, Velma Kelly. The George Abbott-directed production, starring Francine Larimore and Juliette Crosby, ran for 172 performances at the Music Box Theater, and within a year was adapted to a silent film, in which Gaertner herself had a cameo. Chicago was produced by American companies Miramax Films and the Producers Circle in association with the German company Callis Productions. Roxy Hart, also known as Chicago or Chicago Gal, is a 1942 American comedy film directed by William A. Wellman and starring Ginger Rogers, Adolphe Menjot, and George Montgomery. The film is an adaptation of the 1926 play. Principal photography took place in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and ran from December 2001 to April 2002. The courthouse scene was shot in Osgoode Hall. Other scenes were shot at Queen's Park, the former Gooderham and Wirtz Distillery, Casa Loma, the Elgin Theatre, Union Station, the Canada Life Building, the Danforth Music Hall, and the Old City Hall. Several songs from the musical's original score were cut from the film, primarily due to the musical numbers being figments of Roxy's imagination. Tap Dance, A Little Bit of Good, I Can't Do It Alone, Reprise, My Own Best Friend, I Know a Girl, Me and My Baby and When Velma Takes the Stand were removed, and Class, while filmed and recorded for the soundtrack album, is a deleted scene on the DVD, as well as part of an extended version from the film's 2005 broadcast premiere on NBC. An instrumental of Me and My Baby can be heard in its spot, where Roxy enjoys the renewed fame after claiming she's pregnant. Chicago held its world premiere in Los Angeles on December 10, 2002. In North America, the film opened in limited release at 77 theaters on December 27, 2002. It expanded through the following weeks before reaching a peak of 2,701 theaters by the weekend of March 28, 2003, the first weekend after the Academy Awards. Chicago was released by Buena Vista Home Entertainment, under the Miramax Home Entertainment banner, on DVD in Region 1, USA, Canada, and US territories, on August 19, 2003. It was released in full screen and widescreen. In addition to this release, a 2-disc Razzle Dazzle edition was released over 2 years later on December 20, 2005, and later, on Blu-ray format, in January 2007 and, in an updated release, in May 2011. The release provides a feature-length audio commentary track with director Marshall and screenwriter Condon. There is also a deleted musical number called Class, performed by Zeta-Jones and Queen Latifah. Chicago grossed $170.7 million in the United States and Canada, as well as $136.1 million in other territories. Combined, the film grossed $306.8 million worldwide, which was, at the time, the highest gross of any film never to reach number 1 or number 2 in the weekly box office charts in the North American markets, Canada and United States, where it peaked at number 3. Worldwide, Chicago was the highest-grossing live-action musical with $306 million, a record that was then broken by Mamma Mia. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 87% of 260 critics' reviews are positive. The website's consensus reads, "A rousing and energetic adaptation of the Broadway musical, Chicago succeeds on the level of pure spectacle, but provides a surprising level of depth and humor as well." The cast received widespread acclaim for their performances. Tim Roby, reviewer for the Daily Telegraph, labeled Chicago the best screen musical for 30 years. He also stated that it has taken a 3-step tango for us to welcome back the movie musical as a form. Roby also wrote, "This particular Chicago makes the most prolific use it possibly can out of one specific advantage the cinema has over the stage when it comes to song and dance. It's a sustained celebration of parallel montage." Roger Ebert gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, calling it big, brassy fun. However, other reviews claimed that there were issues with the film being too streamlined, and minor complaints were made about Marshall's directing influences. Based on the story of 2 real celebrity murder essays who lived in the 1920s, Chicago has been parlayed into a 1926 Broadway play, a 1927 silent movie, a 1942 film starring Ginger Rogers, and a modern Broadway show, which debuted in 1975 and was revived in 1996. The 20s are roaring in the Windy City, and Roxy Hart wants a piece of the action. Lights, live music, skimpy costumes, and lots of background dancers, she has her sights set on her own vaudeville act. She'd give anything to be like beautiful jazz songstress Velma Kelly and see her name on the local marquee. And she knows that her marriage to dopey, sweet, unenthralling Amos won't be her ticket to fame and fortune. So she starts fooling around with other men. Fooling around leads to screwing around, defined as fooling around without dinner, with Fred Casely, who says he's got connections down at the jazz club. Then she discovers that the only kind of connections on Fred's mind happen between bed sheets, and she knocks him off with her husband's pistol. Ironically, she finds herself on Murderers Row at the women's prison right next to the great Miss Kelly, who has recently dispatched her own husband and sister after catching them in an affair. With the help of matron Mama Morton, both Roxy and Velma get hooked up with smooth-talking lawyer Billy Flynn, who boasts that he's never lost a case defending a female criminal. For $5,000, and a little action on the side, Flynn vows to create such a public outpouring of sympathy and support for his clients that no jury could possibly convict them. And so he does. Smartly mingled into the storyline are bombastic showstoppers and here trending solo numbers that both develop the characters and give a glimpse of the vaudeville fame to which Roxy aspires. Everyone gets into the song and dance, and it's easy to see why the stage show that inspired this film has recently received revived acclaim on Broadway and overseas. Positive elements: through the media frenzy that Billy Flynn whips up, Chicago satirizes the ability of journalists to sway public opinion, tugging heartstrings and overshadowing the truth. The slick lawyer truly believes, it's all a three-ring circus, these trials, the whole world. It's all show business. To sarcastically prove this point, one musical number features Flynn as puppet master for a chorus of reporters, putting words in their mouths and telling the public exactly what he wants them to believe. Another musical interlude shows him tap dancing his way into the minds of the jury, not allowing them to think, but whipping them up emotionally until they're eating out of his hand. At the height of the fame he creates for Roxy, one reporter announces, "She's the sweetest little girl ever accused of murder in Chicago. Women want to look like her. Men want to date her. And little girls even want to take her home in the form of a doll." Though Flynn's dog and pony show is overdone and unrealistic, the message is clear that our society allows the news media far too much control over our ideas about truth. It's also easy to see that famous people are often admired and imitated just because they're famous, and not because they're worth emulating. Throughout Roxy's ordeal, Amos is hopelessly devoted to her, though he does threaten to divorce her when he's told she's carrying a child that isn't his. Spiritual content: apparently raised Catholic, Roxy offers up half-serious prayers and directs flippant appeals to Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. A couple of times, Flynn stops her and tells her to trust in him instead. Flynn arrogantly proclaims, "If Jesus had lived in Chicago today, and if he came to me with $5,000, well, things would have turned out differently." When Roxy supposes aloud that her best bet is to tell the jury the truth, Flynn says, "The truth is a one-way ticket to the death house." Sexual content, undoubtedly the most disturbing part of the film, invading every area from costumes and dancing to lyrics and dialogue. A man grabs Roxy's behind. Roxy and Fred are shown undressing, quick cutaway shots imply more than they show. They're also seen in bed having sex, during which Fred purposely overturns Roxy and Amos' wedding photograph. Dissatisfied with her milquetoast husband, Roxy complains, "When he made love to me, it was like he was fixin' a carburetor." Hoping he'll have an affair and end her misery, she says, "If I ever caught Amos slipping it to someone else, I'd throw him a party." Fred admits he lied to Roxy to get her in bed. "You were hot stuff. I would have said anything to get a piece of that." Matron Mama Morton's solo number is full of cleavage and body innuendo. The cell block tango mixes violent and sexual imagery. Dancers dressed in lingerie often strike sexual poses. Billy Flynn seems to expect sexual favors from his clients. Innuendo is common, and the women performers make much of selling sensuality for fame and fortune. Violent content: although the crimes are stylized and not portrayed graphically, some are not shown at all. This movie is about murders and the women who commit them. On stage, Roxy and Velma use fake Tommy guns to draw oohs and ahs from the crowd. Off stage, Fred is shown shoving Roxy in the bedroom. She shoots him point blank 3 times with a pistol. 6 merry murderesses in the jail perform a whole number about how they killed their husbands or lovers. The theme of the song is, "Yeah, I did it, but it wasn't wrong. He had it coming. If you'd have been there, I bet you would have done the same." One female murderer is hanged on screen. And Roxy's crime is clearly the source of her notoriety. When she dreams of having her own vaudeville act after she gets out of prison, Flynn tells her that killing Fred is what will attract people to her show. That's all the audience wants, to say that they saw someone famous. Despite all this, the script also makes a point about how desensitized our culture is to violence. Roxy has to work hard to stay in the spotlight, since other women are killing their husbands and threatening to steal her fame. We see one other lady kill her husband and 2 women she finds in bed with him. Near the end of the film, an onlooker asks, "Roxy Hart, didn't she kill a guy a while back?" To which the response is, "Who can keep 'em straight anymore?" Crude or profane language, sexual slang dominates, but there's also half a dozen S-words and a dozen mild profanities. God and Jesus names are misused 10 or 12 times. Drug and alcohol content, social drinking takes place in the jazz club. Mama pours drinks for favored prisoners. Male and female characters smoke lots of cigars and cigarettes. The now well-known show tune All That Jazz talks about a club where the gin is cold, but the piano's hot. Other negative elements, both Billy Flynn and his clients lie to the judge and jury in order to get the ruling they want. Roxy tells Velma that the 2 of them having a show together would never work because, she says, "I hate you." Velma replies, "There's only one business in the world where that's not a problem." Conclusion, Chicago arrives on the heels of Oscar nominee Moulin Rouge. And, like its musical predecessor, dazzles audiences with color, action, and rip-roaring sound. With the proven success of Rouge and the rising sensation of Chicago, Time columnist Jess Cagle's recent pronouncement rings especially true: American audiences didn't tire of musicals. They tired of bad musicals. Cagle predicts that we'll soon see a new wave of high-quality movie musicals. For lovers of the genre like me, those are exciting words. But if the sexual content of Rouge and Chicago is any indicator of the moral direction of this genre, I'm worried. Moulin Rouge is set in a brothel, and includes a couple of scenes that will make families more than a little uncomfortable. At least it proffers a wealth of positive life lessons and maintains a modicum of modesty. All the salacious things that it could have done, but didn't, Chicago does. That gives this musical a bawdiness that makes it absolutely inappropriate for young viewers and, at best, disconcerting for older ones. Chicago is fun. It's flashy. And I hope it does give rise to more well-produced musical movies. But it wallows in sexual imagery and spotlights some of life's nastiest stuff: murder, adultery, and an uncontrollable obsession with fame. I really disliked Chicago's plot. It almost doesn't have one. The plot here is so ridiculous and silly, but not in a good way. It has some interesting moments, especially in its first act, but it is mostly a musical that focuses just on songs and never on storytelling and characterization. Yes, because you basically have song after song here, that quickly gets tiresome, and it is done on the expense of plot and character work. All of the characters here are mediocre. I did not care for either of them. Roxy Hart is very annoying, Billy Flynn is ridiculous, Mama is typical, and Velma is so unlikable. Roxy and Velma's partnership is such a cliched plot progression that really bothered me, as I really wanted from the filmmakers to stay away from it. As for the acting, I honestly found even that aspect here to be incredibly overrated. Richard Gere is too over the top, and he gave probably the worst performance here. Catherine Zeta-Jones is good, but her role is unlikable. John C. Reilly is certainly pretty good, but this is such a typical role for him, the one he gets typecast in too often in my opinion. Renée Zellweger is undoubtedly the highlight here, but even her performance isn't as great as critics make it out to be. Let's talk about the songs. Chicago makes a fatal mistake of having too many songs and not enough plot in it. The songs are great, but no matter how great they are, the movie is still filled with too many of them, and that quickly gets annoying, and it tired me. All That Jazz is a classic, so good, and so catchy. And it is also one of the best scenes in the movie. When You're Good to Mama is okay, but not as great as some of the other songs here. We Both Reached for the Gun I really liked, and the sequence in particular is exceptionally strong, even though that is where the film started to fall apart for me. Razzle Dazzle is annoying and all of the other songs are mostly okay, but forgettable, and too similar to each other. Chicago is a technically splendid flick. Its technical aspects are easily the standout ones. I liked its attention to detail in recreating this glorious era with some very memorable imagery and a great use of black and white photography at times. The film also has gorgeous costumes and the cinematography is pretty good. Now, I have to say that the dialogue is pretty lacking, the pacing is quite poor and the film was way too energetic to me. The tone is a big problem as it is too silly and over the top and it is quite poorly adapted and directed. This is the kind of material that is perfect for Broadway, but as a movie, it fails on multiple levels. It is just never meant for this medium, which is evident from its early scenes. And it only succeeds as a musical, but never as a comedy because its humor is not great, and never as a crime film because the tone is too silly for that to work. Chicago was critically acclaimed and received Best Picture in one of the worst years ever for the Oscars with quite poor nomination slate. And it did not deserve to win even with that weak competition. Its acting nods are simply ridiculous, as is the nod for director and adapted screenplay. The editing is also very poor in this movie, which is why its nomination is baffling to me, but the wins for art direction and costume design are very much deserved. Overall, Chicago isn't bad, but it's also far from great, and it is one of the most overrated genre films of all time. It's been so long that during the opening number at the Onyx Club, as the surviving member of the Kelly sisters belts out all that jazz in an atmosphere of smoke and seduction, your heart flips. Why, you ask yourself, did Hollywood give up on musicals? Chicago is not Singin' in the Rain, nor Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. It is cynical, satirical, sensational. There are witsy one-liners, screwing around is full and around without dinner, and machine gun lyrics. Oh yes, they both reached for the gun, crackling like an electric storm. There are dance routines that melt your undies and humor blacker than the piano player's cheeks. Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, is a bottled blonde, married to a mechanic, John C. Reilly, and having a bit on the side with a traveling salesman, Dominic West, who promises he'll make her a star. When she discovers he's as phony as baloney, she fills him full of lead. By this time, Velma Kelly, Catherine Zeta-Jones, has plugged her little sister for taking her fella to bed. Chicago, 1929, is a city that doesn't hold its passion as well as its liquor. In this town, murder is a form of entertainment, says Billy Flynn, Richard Gere. He knows that justice is show business and it's all a circus, kid. He's the hottest lawyer in a city awash with crime, who specializes in dangerous dames on capital charges. I never lost a case, he boasts. For $1,000 down, he'll create a fiction around the facts, turn a villainess into a nun, razzle-dazzle em with particular panache. For him, the courthouse is a theater. On the one hand, you have the ingenue who learns that fame is a game and the razor-tongued hoofer who bends the rules with a shimmy of fishnet, and on the other there is the legal eagle, casting spells over juries and using the press as a front-line weapon against the truth, while in prison the corrupt matron Missy Morton, Queen Latifah, wheels and deals for the prettiest jailbirds with humongous charm. The Broadway musical was created in 1975 by John Kander and Fred Ebb from a popular play by journalist Maureen Watkins in the 20s. When the legendary Bob Fosse was brought in as choreographer, something extraordinary occurred. The enduring success of Chicago's revival over the last few years reinforces this. With such great songs and show-stopping routines, how could the film fail? Very easily. Whatever the world according to Liza with a Z thinks, Cabaret on screen was a glossy fake compared to the stage version, and Francis Ford Coppola's Harlem extravaganza, The Cotton Club, through which Gere sleepwalked, became an expensive, embarrassing flop. Screenwriter Bill Condon and director Rob Marshall have retained the spirit of the original. Fosse's influence is everywhere, and the only irritation is Marshall's tendency to cut away from dance numbers in order to follow the story in real time. The performances are flawless, with Zeta-Jones dominating the floor and Zellweger taking Roxy from wide-eyed innocence to calculated celebrity, without the hint of a false note. Gere greases the old tap shoes and loosens his tie. Flynn is a gift of a role, gratefully received. Chicago sure got rhythm. Watching these girls deliver, especially during the finale, is probably a mortal sin. Chicago continues the reinvention of the musical that started with Moulin Rouge. Although modern audiences don't like to see stories interrupted by songs, apparently they like songs interrupted by stories. The movie is a dazzling song and dance extravaganza, with just enough words to support the music and allow everyone to catch their breath between songs. You can watch it like you listen to an album, over and over. The same phenomenon explains why Moulin Rouge was a bigger hit on DVD than in theaters. The movie stars sweet-faced Renée Zellweger as Roxy Hart, who kills her lover and convinces her husband to pay for her defense, and Catherine Zeta-Jones as Velma Kelly, who broke up her vaudeville sister act by murdering her husband and her sister while they were engaged in a sport not licensed for in-laws. Richard Gere is Billy Flynn, the slick, high-priced attorney who boasts he can beat any rap, for a $5,000 fee. If Jesus Christ had lived in Chicago, he explains, and if he'd had $5,000, and had come to me, things would have turned out differently. This story, lightweight but cheerfully lurid, fueled Bob Fosse, John Kander, and Fred Ebb's original stage production of Chicago, which opened in 1975 and has been playing somewhere or other ever after, since 1997 again on Broadway. Fosse, who grew up in Chicago in the 1930s and 1940s, lived in a city where the daily papers roared with the kinds of headlines the movie loves. Killers were romanticized or vilified, cops and lawyers and reporters lived in each other's pockets, and newspapers read like pulp fiction. There's an inspired scene of ventriloquism and puppetry at a press conference, with all of the characters dangling from strings. For Fosse, the Chicago of Roxy Hart supplied the perfect peg to hang his famous hat. The movie doesn't update the musical so much as bring it to a high electric streamlined gloss. The director Rob Marshall, a stage veteran making his big screen debut, paces the film with gusto. It's not all breakneck production numbers, but it's never far from one. And the choreography doesn't copy Fosse's inimitable style, but it's not far from it, either. The movie sideswipes imitation on its way to homage. The decision to use non-singers and non-dancers is always controversial in musicals, especially in these days when big stars are needed to headline expensive productions. Of Zellweger and Gere, it can be said that they are persuasive in their musical roles and well cast as their characters. Zeta-Jones was, in fact, a professional dancer in London before she decided to leave the chorus line and take her chances with acting, and her dancing in the movie is a reminder of the golden days. The film opens with her All That Jazz number, which plays like a promise Chicago will have to deliver on. And what a good idea to cast Queen Latifah in the role of Mama, the prison matron. She belts out "When You're Good to Mama" with the superb assurance of a performer who knows what good is and what Mama likes. The story is inspired by the screaming headlines of the front page era and the decade after. We meet Roxy Hart, married early and unwisely, to Amos Hart, John C. Reilly, a credulous lunkhead. She has a lover named Fred Casely, Dominic West, who sweet-talks her with promises of stardom. When she finds out he's a two-timing liar, she guns him down, and gets a one-way ticket to death row, already inhabited by Velma and overseen by Mama. Can she get off? Only Billy Flynn, Gere, can pull off a trick like that, although his price is high and he sings a song in praise of his strategy, "Give 'em the old razzle-dazzle." Velma has already captured the attention of newspaper readers, but after the poor sap Amos pays Billy his fee, a process begins to transform Roxy into a misunderstood heroine. She herself shows a certain genius in the process, as when she dramatically reveals she is pregnant with Amos' child, a claim that works only if nobody in the courtroom can count to 9. Instead of interrupting the drama with songs, Marshall and screenwriter Bill Condon stage the songs more or less within Roxy's imagination, where everything is a little more supercharged than life, and even lawyers can tap dance. To be sure, Gere's own tap dancing is on the level of performers in the Chicago Bar Association's annual review. There are a few moments of straight pathos, including Amos Hart's pathetic disbelief that his Roxy could have cheated on him. He sings Mr. Cellophane about how people see right through him. But for the most part the film runs on solid gold cynicism. Riley brings a kind of pathetic sincere naivete to the role, the same tone, indeed, he brings to a similar husband in The Hours, where it is also needed. It's surprising to see the confidence in his singing and dancing, until you find out he was in musicals all through school. Zellweger is not a Bonhoeffer, but then again Roxy Hart isn't supposed to be a star, the whole point is that she isn't, and what Zellweger invaluably contributes to the role is Roxy's dreamy infatuation with herself, and her quickly growing mastery of publicity. Velma is supposed to be a singing and dancing star, and Zeta-Jones delivers with glamour, high style, and the delicious confidence the world forces on you when you are one of its most beautiful inhabitants. As for Queen Latifah, she's too young to remember Sophie Tucker, but not to channel her. Chicago is a musical that might have seemed unfilmable, but that was because it was assumed it had to be transformed into more conventional terms. By filming it in its own spirit, by making it frankly a stagey song and dance review, by kidding the stories instead of lingering over them, the movie is big, brassy fun. The fundamental conundrum of how to sell a traditional musical to audiences unaccustomed to characters bursting into song was solved by Condon's script, which reimagines the numbers as the fruit of a stage-struck Corinne's rich fantasy life, intercutting them with the parallel reality the songs narrate. However, while it effectively underlines points about the fleeting nature of fame, the indistinct line between celebrity and notoriety and the similarities between showbiz razzle-dazzle and a corrupt legal system, the film version boasts few significant innovations. Much of the dialogue and jokes are word for word from the stage show, and conception of musical numbers strays very little. Pick also refers to numerous movie musicals, including a cabaret-style nightclub opening. Viewed in terms of its attempt to resurrect the musical as a contemporary film genre, Chicago is way ahead of lifeless blunders like A Chorus Line. But it's arguably less buoyant or inventive than recent unconventional, and artistically controversial, tuners such as Moulin Rouge or Dancer in the Dark. Set in the Windy City in the Roaring Twenties, the Jazz Age story opens on sultry vaudevillian Velma Kelly, Catherine Zeta-Jones, taking the stage solo in what's previously been a sister act after surprising her husband with the offending sibling and rubbing out the adulterous duo. In the audience to witness her arrest is unworldly Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, a chorus girl with dreams of stardom, married to gullible dolt Amos, John C. Reilly. A few weeks later, Roxy wises up that her lover, Dominic West, has been stringing her along with promises to get her into showbiz. She guns him down in a fit of rage and winds up joining Velma on death row. Making use of shrewdly connected prison warden matron Mama Morton, Queen Latifah, Velma has lined up ace lawyer Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, who keeps her media spotlight burning as he prepares for her trial. Roxy, too, secures Flynn's services when Amos stumps up a hefty cash advance. The lawyer concocts an elaborate convent girl led astray story for Roxy, making her the darling of the media and relegating Velma to the back pages. When a new murderess threatens to steal her thunder, Roxy consolidates her press profile by announcing she's carrying Amos' child. The central relationship between Roxy and Velma carries less weight than the interaction between Roxy and Flynn. This undermines the effectiveness of the final act, already a weakness in the stage version. Best known for the 1999 TV remake of Annie, Marshall has a solid background in musical theater that well serves the musical segs, which shift confidently between fantasy and reality. The device works nicely in numbers like Amos' acknowledgement of his own insignificance, Mr. Cellophane, the Death Row Dame's account of their misdeeds, Cell Block Tango, and in smartly staged non-musical set pieces like the historic first hanging of a woman. But too often the cross-cutting interrupts the rhythm of the songs to clutter the action, instilling a certain frustration at never seeing a song or dance number played out in full. Editor Martin Walsh cuts the film like a trailer, giving a semblance of briskness but skimping on the character's dimensionality. The fast cutting also dulls some of the shine from the two leads' dance accomplishments. Zeta-Jones reveals herself to be a full-voiced belter and a more than creditable hoofer, making Velma a savvy, conniving but sympathetic temptress untroubled by moral scruples. Zellweger also measures up well enough in the song and dance department, but convinces more in Roxy's initial persona as a borderline innocent than later, as she becomes more calculating and cold-hearted. As the character whose dreams bring much of the action to life, she remains a somewhat pallid figure. Gere has fun embodying a soulless charmer in Circus Master Flynn, but his lackluster courtroom climax tap routine makes one long for a real dancer in the role. Making the matron a sharp exploiter with her eye firmly on the dollar but not completely without loyalty, Latifah socks across the saucy "when you're good to mama." But the character's rueful ballad class, arguably one of the show's best songs, has been dropped from the film, despite being clearly set up. Riley is sweetly touching as the trusting sap, while Christine Baranski is arch and amusing as bleeding heart radio reporter Mary Sunshine. Lucy Liu appears briefly as a socialite Hellcat, and Chita Rivera, who played Velma in the original Foss production alongside Gwen Verdon, cameos as a prison habitué. Marshall's choreography retains some distinctive Foss influences, particularly in the opening All That Jazz number, nevertheless hampered more than any other song by excessive cutting away from the dancers. Australian Lenser Dion Beebe, praise, holy smoke, doesn't always shoot the dance segs to best advantage, but places the action on a rich canvas of dark tones and bloody reds, combining with John Myra's sharp production design and Colleen Atwood's slinky costumes to create a seamless look that blends theatricality with reality. A new song written by Kander and Ebb and sung by Zellweger and Zeta-Jones, called I Move On, is being added to the end credits, but was not in place on prints being press screened. Once upon a time, a Broadway musical like Chicago would have automatically received a silver screen treatment, but that was before the popularity of the movie musical crashed and burned. Nevertheless, the enthusiasm surrounding the 1996 revival of Bob Foss's 1975 play was so extreme that studios were willing to absorb a certain amount of financial risk on the off chance that this movie might be able to succeed where so many others had failed. The last major motion picture musical was 1990's IXS Evita, which performed tepidly, with a domestic gross of about $50 million against a budget of $55 million. Miramax Films is hoping for a better showing for Chicago. The movie represents good, solid entertainment. It's not nearly as rousing as the Broadway revival, then again, it's rare that the cinematic version of a musical comes close to the stage incarnation, but, for those unable or unwilling to see a live production, it represents a sparkling replacement. The film strikes a nice balance between the lavishly overproduced likes of Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge and the less openly flamboyant movies from the 50s. The style, by intention, echoes that of the late, great choreographer Foss. The history of Chicago is nothing if not convoluted. Originally a play by Chicago Tribune reporter Maureen Watkins, Chicago chronicled the real-life 1924 murder trials of two women who were eventually acquitted of their alleged crimes. Watkins' non-musical production reached Broadway in December 1926 and became the basis of two movies, including the 1942 Ginger Rogers vehicle, Roxy Hart. Decades later, Bob Foss obtained the rights to the story, and, working with John Kander and Fred Ebb, he brought a musical version to the stage in 1975, with Gwen Verdon, Chita Rivera, and Jerry Orbach in the lead roles. Despite receiving lukewarm reviews, the play stayed alive for nearly 900 performances before ending its run. When Chicago was revived in 1996, initially as part of New York City Center Encore's series, choreographer Anne Reinking devised the new version as an homage to her mentor, Foss, albeit with a lighter, less cynical tone. The movie adaptation, which has been rumored for several years, and once had names like Madonna and Goldie Hawn attached, is heavily based on the 1996 edition rather than the 1975 one. Fame is fleeting because the public is fickle. And nothing titillates the public like the sensational. Looking back on the 1990s, which news stories are the ones that come to mind most quickly? Tonya Harding clubbing Nancy Kerrigan? O.J. Simpson's murder trial? The Lewinsky scandal? Consider this, and it's not hard to understand why Chicago, which is about the celebrity status often accorded to criminals and the short-lived nature of fame, has found such favor during its revival. Things have changed a lot since the 70s. We were now ready to confront things that had been too raw in the immediate wake of Watergate. The film's central characters are Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, a housewife who fantasizes becoming a vaudeville star, and Velma Kelly, Catherine Zeta-Jones, a chorus girl who dreams of greater fame than she currently has. Both women find themselves in the Cook County Jail on Murderers Row. Roxy shot her lover after discovering that he had lied to her about working to further her singing career. Velma eliminated her husband and sister after finding them together in bed. Both women are being represented by slick lawyer Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, who has never lost a case. His approach is to set up his clients as media darlings, then use that exposure to swing the trial in their favor. In this town, murder's a form of entertainment, he comments. He refers to courtrooms as three-ring circuses and assures Roxy that justice can be blinded by the razzle-dazzle he will employ. Their notoriety sets up Roxy and Velma as rivals for the public spotlight. The lurid details of their lives and crimes make them instant celebrities. But neither stays on top for long, and it becomes a difficult task to recapture the interest of the public once another sensational crime has been committed. There's an insatiable appetite for fresh blood, and, unless Roxy and Velma can come up with new revelations to keep them on the front page, they will be quickly forgotten, not only by the general populace, but by their camera-loving lawyer, as well. Several of the play's numbers have been cut for reasons of pacing and length, but those that remain are expertly staged, combining high-energy, Fosse-like choreography with a uniquely cinematic approach that allows vaudeville fantasy sequences to intertwine with more concrete moments. For example, the courtroom scenes of Roxy's trial freely switch back and forth between testimony and Richard Gere's rendition of Razzle Dazzle. Credit for this goes to choreographer-turned-director Rob Marshall, who is making his feature debut. The real showstopper remains, as has always been the case with the play, the opening interpretation of All That Jazz. I have few complaints about the casting, which was viewed as controversial when it was announced. Catherine Zeta-Jones devours the part of Velma with relish, as if she was born to play the stuck-up murderess. Renée Zellweger, while not Zeta-Jones' equal when it comes to drawing the camera's attention, is solid for the most part, although there are a few occasions when her singing could have been stronger. Richard Gere, freed from the need to be serious and intense, exudes charm and charisma in a fun, breezy role that requires him to sing, but doesn't stretch his limited vocal abilities. John C. Reilly is a true sad sack as Roxy's cuckolded husband, and Queen Latifah is Mama Morton, the matron in charge of the female prisoners on Murderers Row, who will help out her charges for a modest fee. Even though the movie's original source material is 75 years old, the issues addressed by this film will be familiar to everyone in the audience, proving the point that technology may evolve, but human nature remains the same. The social commentary and attacks on the American system of jurisprudence are as stinging as they are valid. The 9 or 10 song and dance numbers allow us to enjoy Chicago on a less cerebral, more visceral level than might be the case if this was not a musical, but there's still a fair amount of substance to be considered. It's a pleasure to note that the return of the movie-adapted stage musical is such an unqualified success. If only audiences will pay the production the attention it deserves. Hometowns to Hollywood Celluloid Road Trip Blogathon is about discussing films that revolve around a particular U.S. city. For my entry, I've chosen the 2002 film, Chicago. This movie has been on my DVR for 3 years, the longest a film has ever sat on the device. In fact, Chicago has spent the most time on my DVR, staying there since May of 2017. So, this was the perfect opportunity to finally see it. Even though it was my first time seeing the movie, it was a title I had heard of before. Whenever cinematic musicals of the 21st century are discussed, Chicago is usually brought up in the conversation. However, I never made time to check the film out. Now, in 2020, I am ready to review Chicago. The acting, Chicago is an ensemble film. Therefore, multiple actors pulled off a performance that was enjoyable to watch. Whenever I think about Queen Latifah's portrayal of matron Mama Morton, I think about how she carried her character with confidence. Even in the musical number, When You're Good to Mama, she appeared comfortable performing in front of an audience. Through the use of music and theatrics, Queen Latifah was able to garner attention from the audience and create an effective on-screen presence. I have seen some of Richard Gere's films prior to watching Chicago. However, most of those projects have leaned more toward the drama genre. His role, Billy Flynn, allowed him to step out of his comfort zone. Similar to what I said about Queen Latifah's performance, Richard looked comfortable in his role. He even did a good job when it came to the musical numbers. What I liked about Renée Zellweger and Catherine Zeta-Jones' performances is how their on-screen personalities were so different from one another, yet complemented each other so well. It created such an interesting dynamic between these characters. Like I said about Richard Gere, Renée and Catherine did a good job pulling off the musical performances, as well as the portrayals of their characters. The musical numbers, if you're going to create a musical, you need to create musical numbers that are worth watching. When it comes to Chicago, the musical numbers were the highlight of this project. They are all presented as dream sequences, to show how Roxy views her world. I found this is to be an interesting creative choice, as most musicals include their musical numbers within the events of the plot. Chicago's musical numbers were stylized, serving as visual spectacles. Bright colors and lights provide a consistent component, adding to their photogenic appeal. I also liked the creativity that could be found in these musical numbers. An example is We Both Reached for the Gun, where all the characters except for Billy are showcased as a puppet. The historical accuracy, when I was watching Chicago, I noticed how the entire production appeared historically accurate. This film takes place in 1924, which is reflected in various ways. One of them is the hairstyles of the female characters. Both Roxy and Velma sport shorter hairdos, showing women's style choices of that time. The costumes, in Roxy's world and the dream sequences, seemed to belong in that decade. Longer coats were worn by some of the female characters, with a millionaire named Kitty wearing a white one with embroidered flowers in a scene. Set designs and even vehicles showcased the historical accuracy I found in this film. It tells the audience that the creative team behind the project cared about their film's presentation. Too much burlesque. While there are plenty of musical numbers in Chicago, the majority of them featured burlesque. Personally, I am not a fan of this particular performance style. Therefore, I didn't care for burlesque's abundance. Aside from my personal opinion, the number of burlesque routines felt like they were rehashing the same idea. There was only so many times the movie could present a scantily clad dancer performing mature dance moves before the concept got old. Chicago is a film that, in my opinion, would have benefited from having less burlesque. Mixed messages. As I've said before, I watch movies to be entertained. However, I can appreciate a film that contains a good message. In Chicago's case, there were mixed messages throughout the story. One good example revolves around Roxy's quest for stardom. On more than one occasion, other women have gained more attention than her. This led me to believe the movie's overarching message would be about how there will always be someone who has more than you no matter how much you strive for what you want. I won't spoil the film for those who haven't seen it. But what I will say is the film's final outcome contradicts the message that seemed to be delivered. Characters that are terrible people. When I reviewed 20th Century last month, I talked about how all the characters were awful individuals. This caused me to lose investment in them and their stories. Chicago has a similar flaw, with most of the characters being terrible people for different reasons. Toward the beginning of the film, Roxy is shown murdering a man, even though he was walking away when the crime was committed. The song, Funny Honey, highlights how Roxy is glad her husband, Amos, comes across as ignorant because she thinks that will help her cover up her crime. Out of all the characters in this film, the only one I cared about was Roxy's husband, Amos. While he was a simple man, he was the only character who was a genuinely good person. I couldn't help feeling sorry for him during the musical number, Mr. Cellophane. The way I feel about Chicago is the same way I feel about Moulin Rouge. It was okay. The 2002 movie does have merit, which can be found in the acting performances and the musical numbers. But, similar to Moulin Rouge, Chicago relies more on style than substance. Because the audience knows the protagonist committed a crime, there is no sense of intrigue. It also doesn't help that the majority of the characters are terrible people. The mixed messages within the story are confusing, with the script saying one thing, but then being contradicted later on. If you're not a fan of burlesque, then you probably won't enjoy most of the film's musical numbers, as they abundantly feature burlesque routines. However, the musical numbers in general were well crafted, especially on a technical level. Therefore, I would recommend these parts of the film. As for the movie itself, this is one I don't see myself revisiting. If you look into movie musical history, you will notice one large thing. You will notice one large gap from, roughly, the mid-1980s until the early 2000s. You'll see that Walt Disney animated films filled a gap that movie musicals were leaving. I suppose that you could qualify these films as movie musicals, but they weren't movie musicals in the traditional sense. They were animated and they were made for children. The movie musical seemed to have disappeared. That is, until 2002, when Chicago arrived. Chicago is a musical about Velma Kelly and Roxy Hart, two murderesses on death row trying to, well, not die, by using their fame to make a name for themselves. The musical has been around since the 1970s. But, this was a tricky one to translate to screen. How do you smoothly insert the songs within the realm of film? Honestly, I think that is one of the geniuses of this film. Bill Condon, the screenwriter, and Rob Marshall, the director, cleverly made most of the songs happen within the characters' heads. So, it didn't really seem weird when all of these people began breaking out into song because, well, it was all just in Roxy Hart's head. The cast of this film is phenomenal. It is just loaded with so much talent. First and foremost, Renée Zellweger as Roxy Hart and Catherine Zeta-Jones as Velma Kelly. Both of these women are crazy talented with amazing vocal ranges. Richard Gere plays the sleazy lawyer Billy Flynn, who does a tap dancing number in the film that I am always in awe of. Queen Latifah and Christine Baranski both perform well. But, most of all, I want to talk about John C. Reilly as Amos Hart. Up until I saw this film, I had only known John C. Reilly as a comedic actor, one that I loved. I didn't see his dramatic roles until later in life. And, if you haven't seen him in a dramatic role, sweet Jesus, what are you waiting for? He's incredible. He perfectly portrays Roxy's often forgotten husband, Amos. His rendition of Mr. Cellophane makes me sad every single time I hear it. This film perfectly intertwines the musicals of the 1930s and 1940s, by having almost all of the musical numbers take place on a stage, in front of an audience. But, it so cleverly updates it to modern times. And this film, along with Moulin Rouge and even 8 Mile you could say, brought back the movie musical and it hasn't left since. In Chicago in the Roaring Twenties, Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, shoots her furniture salesman lover when he reneges on helping her break into showbiz. She winds up in a women's prison run by Big Mama, Queen Latifah, and it's here that she meets another accused killer, Velma, Catherine Zeta-Jones, a showgirl who killed her lover and her sister when she found them together. Both women hire lawyer Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, who has a reputation for being the best there is. This is a superb adaptation of the musical, which was adapted from a play film twice before, most famously in 1942 as Roxy Hart, with Ginger Rogers as Roxy. Choreographer and director Rob Marshall, obviously inspired by the original stage choreography by Bob Fosse, does a remarkable job for his first feature. The songs are great and are beautifully integrated into the drama. This is a real return to the vintage musical film. None of the lead actors are known for their song and dance talents, but all rise to the occasion. Renée Zellweger is a wonderfully brassy Roxy, Catherine Zeta-Jones is a very slinky Velma, and, in perhaps the most satisfying surprise, Richard Gere socks over his numbers as Billy and does a terrific tap solo. Bawdy, funny, and exhilarating, Chicago is great entertainment. Bringing the stage musical Chicago to the screen has been a long, difficult process, but director Rob Marshall's sassy movie has made it worth the wait. Marshall, who directed the recent hit made-for-TV musical remakes of Annie and Cinderella, has crafted an entertaining musical with several standout performances, though it's marred by one mistake. Telling the story of two murdering dames, vaudeville star Velma Kelly, dazzling Catherine Zeta-Jones, and wannabe Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, Chicago satirizes the world's losers by laughing at them, not with them. Every type of cheap whore, conniving women, two-timing men, sensationalist reporters, dishonest lawyers gets their due. Miss Zellweger's raunchy Roxy is bad to the bone, despite misguided attempts to work victimhood into Roxy's routine. Roxy lies, cheats, pumps bullets into her lover and pins it on her innocent husband, played flawlessly by character actor John C. Reilly. When hubby blows Roxy's cover, it's off to prison, where Roxy meets Zeta-Jones' media darling murderess Velma, prison matron Mama Morton, Queen Latifah and her heaving bosom, and the women of Chicago's death row. After hooking up with a sleazy lawyer, Richard Gere, who makes O.J. Simpson hustler Johnny Cochran look almost honorable, Roxy wraps the media around her slender figure and steals Velma's spotlight. Using a clever narrative style, Marshall retains the sarcasm and sex appeal of the original Broadway show written by the late, Oscar-winning choreographer/director Bob Fosse and Fred Ebb, which itself was based on the original 1927 drama by Maureen Dallas Watkins. Showstoppers are sprinkled throughout Chicago, such as Riley's knockout Mr. Cellophane number. His voice and movements are superb. Making the most of a secondary role to the movie's focus on Roxy, Zeta-Jones kicks up quite a fuss as Velma, moving beautifully through several numbers including All That Jazz. Her sexy performance makes it all look like a piece of cake. Richard Gere's tap-dancing Billy Flynn is a wickedly slick con man, and Gere's is another fine performance in an underrated career, looking for Mr. Goodbar, Pretty Woman, Summersby. Veteran actress Christine Baranski sparkles in her portrayal of Mary Sunshine, the mindless mouthpiece that symbolizes the media. Presenting his musical bag of tricks one by one with good timing and shrewd use of his cast, director Marshall demonstrates real skill in matching talent, story, and theme. Unfortunately for him and for fans, especially Fosse fans, Marshall misjudges his own choreography. Chicago's dancing is good, though Zellweger's muscled movements often come off more spindly than sinewy, but there is no substitute for Bob Fosse's striking choreography. Chicago the stage musical was intimately sensual, relaxed and erotic at once, and that's Fosse, for whom plot is inseparable from dance. Because Marshall has replaced Fosse's uniquely charged style with his own, Chicago the movie is less erotic, less alluring and less mesmerizing than it might have been. Was actress/choreographer Anne Reinking, Annie, who danced for and studied with Fosse, unavailable. Still, Chicago is immensely entertaining, and its story is, sadly, as relevant now as it was when the show premiered on Broadway in 1975. It's a steamy, sexy good show. For those who like their satire hard-boiled, and don't mind indulging in the cigarette-smoking cynicism of murdering vixens on the make, Chicago is your kind of movie. The double-disc razzle-dazzle DVD edition of Chicago is an excellent piece of work. The movie still stands tall, with gorgeous lighting, crisp photography, and smooth transitions, and Rob Marshall makes a good case in the audio commentary, with writer Bill Condon, for substituting his own choreography for Bob Foss's. It's the rest of what's in this box worth every penny at a suggested retail price of $30 that matters, including the 12-page, glossy musical-to-movie story. Bonus material plays for keeps, a solid 27-minute stage-to-screen documentary, extended footage of the picture's musical performances from 3 cameras, and a 13-minute gem called When Liza Minnelli Became Roxy Hart that does the cabaret star justice, with a rare performance on Dinah Shore's afternoon talk show in the 1970s that features a bona fide Broadway surprise. There's more, including a 19-minute profile of director Rob Marshall, a deleted musical number, Class, sung by Queen Latifah's Mama Morton and Zeta-Jones' Velma, with optional commentary by Condon and Marshall, and bits on costume and production and more. While a 35-minute cable music channel special is a waste of time, it's mostly clips from the movie. The DVD contains enough razzle to dazzle the toughest Chicago fan. Click the image to buy the DVD. The story is about Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, and Velma Kelly, Catherine Zeta-Jones, who are in jail for murder. They hire Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, as their lawyer to help them get away with it. Mama Morton, Queen Latifah, also helps them. Many musical numbers are featured throughout the film. The opening scene and song is All That Jazz. This really does have to be the best opening to a musical. With Velma belting out All That Jazz. Roxy's husband Amos, John C. Reilly, attempts to help her until he realizes that she had been cheating on him with Fred Casely, Dominic West. Funny Honey is Roxy's song about her husband Amos, which is overlapped with the police finding out it was in fact Roxy who killed Fred. When You're Good to Mama is the entrance of matron Mama Morton, which is a fantastic entrance. Having Mama being like a red-hot mama, which is a cool angle to take, especially with Queen Latifah in the part. I have seen the stage show 3 times and love the way it was adapted for the film. With everything happening through Roxy's mind. Instead of just breaking out in song every now and then. It builds up the musical numbers by what is occurring between the characters. Then with the musical numbers and dancing appearing to be on a stage, the use of the prison bar's cell block tango and All I Care About. We Both Reached for the Gun is a very clever part in which Billy speaks for Roxy. Treating her like a dummy. Singing for her, which is rather amusing. Roxy. This number is when Roxy believes she is going to be a big star with her name in lights when she gets out of jail. I think she looks very much like Marilyn Monroe in this number. Very old style Hollywood. I Can't Do It Alone is Velma's other big number. Where she is trying to persuade Roxy that she could take the part her sister used to do in a double act. As she can't do it alone. Fantastic dance routine from a desperate Velma who is trying so hard to impress Roxy. As Roxy as stole all her press. Mr. Cellophane is Amos' big number when he makes clear that he feels like he is invisible. I find this song really heartfelt and heartbreaking, as Amos does seem to be ignored by all of those around him. You can look right through me, walk right by me, and not even know I'm there. Razzle Dazzle, sung by Billy Flynn just before Roxy's trial, explains the whole view on the film. Give M the old razzle dazzle M. I really enjoy that musical number set in the court with the dancers draped over the judge and Amos at different points. Showing that the whole trial, and the world, is a circus. After the trial, another murder takes place as the verdict is announced, causing all of the reporters not to care about Roxy anymore. She is now yesterday's news, and as Billy says, that's Chicago. Amos is the only person sitting in the courtroom, as he actually believed Roxy was really pregnant. He then finds out the truth and she leaves him. Roxy is shown auditioning but not making it, and then is met by Velma, who said 1 jazz killer is nothing, but 2. And the last scene opens with Roxy and Velma having their own double act. Nowadays / Hot Honey Rag, which is a fantastic way to end the movie. Shows Roxy and Velma being back on top again. An original song, I Just Move On, was written for the movie and played over the credits, sung by both Renée Zellweger and Catherine Zeta-Jones. Was nominated for an Oscar but did not win it, which was totally shocking. Yet I am a massive musicals fan and this is the film which really started it all off. It's just razzle dazzle and all that jazz. Which one should watch in my opinion. It also was which started me being a massive fan of Catherine Zeta-Jones, who totally deserved her Oscar. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this film. The parallel editing within the plot is unique and an artistic masterpiece. The acting, dance numbers, and singing in this film did not disappoint. My absolute favorite thing about this film is the set and costume designs. The filmmakers excelled at creating a visual experience for the audience through ornate detailing in every single set and costume piece. However, I will say that some musical numbers seemed a little pointless, and overall silly compared to the others. It is easy to tell that both the filmmakers and actors put everything they had into this film. As usual, Renée Zellweger does a phenomenal job, and her performance in this film is both charming and daunting. Catherine Zeta-Jones shined brightly in her performance as well, especially in the dance numbers. It was easy to tell Catherine is the better dancer between the two. Both women completely became the characters they portrayed and had outstanding performances. The plot of this film stays consistently entertaining throughout, and for the most part I would say there is a well-established balance between the dialogue and musical numbers. I know this film recreates the musical Chicago in a movie form, and it's not the movie's fault, but some songs are way too silly and pointless. These silly musical numbers lost my attention into the film for their whole duration. However, the transitions into and out of the musical numbers were seamless and kept my attention all throughout. The parallel editing between scenes in this film was extremely unique, and I cannot recall ever seeing anything with a similar style pulled off as effortlessly as this film does. The creative liberty taken by the filmmakers was genius and well thought out. For example, the scene with Roxy being used metaphorically and symbolically as a puppet by her lawyer was very expressive. Overall, this film captures the musical Chicago in a new and creative way. The film is both entertaining and enjoyable to watch. However, I'm not sure if I would ever watch this film again. Once may be enough for me. The movie musical sees a dramatic rebirth in the musical Chicago, a production about women on death row and how they work to get out of prison for crimes that they undoubtedly committed. Renée Zellweger, after years as the minor starlet, saw her fame rise as the Oscar-nominated lead in Bridget Jones' Diary. Now she's moved from comedy to musical, and the Academy has taken note once again. With her second nomination as the murderous Roxy Hart, Zellweger delivers a performance of charismatic precision. Though we often like her co-star Catherine Zeta-Jones better, she is unmistakably in tune in Chicago. Roxy is on death row because she killed her boyfriend Fred Casely because he had cheated on her. Jealousy is to be expected, but her troubles rise as we learn that she was, herself, cheating on her husband Amos, John C. Reilly. Arriving on death row, she finds her idol Velma Kelly, Zeta-Jones, waiting for her attorney Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, to get her out of the charges of murdering her sister and husband, whom she caught in the act as exposed in the rousing number Cell Block Tango. Zeta-Jones is delicious in the film. Her performance is fun, energetic and surprising. The wife of Michael Douglas never seemed the type, from her previous performances, to excel in such a role. Gere is also at the top of his game after having been off it since his stellar turn in Pretty Woman 12 years prior. His renaissance is assured after seeing him at work here. Just like Zeta-Jones, it's not the type of performance one expects, but it's certainly a perf one enjoys. When looking at the glossier, in-front roles, one often forgets about the supporting players. Both Latifah and Riley are terrific in the film. With the hard-nosed cell block matron, another actress might have made her less genial and interesting. Latifah gives her an adorable quality that counteracts the manipulative nature of the character. Riley, on the other hand, is the lovable, repressed husband put upon by a wife who has never appreciated him. His mournful number Mr. Cellophane embodies the grief of which he's possessed as the man who no one ever seemed to notice. A revival of the movie musical had been languishing ever since Evita failed to garner the box office and the awards such a rebirth would require. The evolution of film musical success came 5 years after Madonna's vision of Eva Peron, when Nicole Kidman and Ewan McGregor helped usher in the new era with Moulin Rouge. Now, we have another pick to carry the crown for a new generation of theater-to-screen adaptations. Whereas Mulan was written directly for the screen by the bizarre director Baz Luhrmann, Chicago is directly adapted from one of Bob Fosse's biggest successes. With music and lyrics by John Kander and Fred Ebb, Chicago is a feast for the ears, but like nearly all musicals, has its share of duds. Cell Block Tango and All That Jazz are pitch perfect with wonderful visuals to go along. Meanwhile, Funny Honey and Razzle Dazzle are pastiche. Director Rob Marshall and writer Bill Condon, both children of the New York theater, bring Chicago the flair everyone expects from its theatrical productions. The movie certainly feels like a filmed stage show, but that is an entirely appropriate feel when considering the style chosen. An MC, Taye Diggs, even introduces the various musical numbers. Chicago began an era that quickly killed itself. It seems inconceivable that we'll have a sustained period of musicals on the big screen that can equate to the era between and including West Side Story and Cabaret. However, we can hope that Chicago is the sort of benchmark that other films must exceed in order to consider this a true revival. Chicago stars Renée Zellweger as Roxy Hart, an impressionable young woman whose dreams of becoming a cabaret performer are dashed when, after killing her lover, she ends up in jail where her idol Velma Kelly, Catherine Zeta-Jones, has been incarcerated for a similar crime. There she meets an assorted cast of characters, all having killed their husbands in some unique way, as we discover through the musical number Cell Block Tango. Desperately wanting to get out of jail, she convinces hotshot lawyer Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, to act as her defense attorney. Known for getting beautiful women off death row and back into the streets, Billy uses various tactics, including creating awareness and sympathy in the media, to stay a conviction. Roxy becomes an instant media icon and, without leaving prison, achieves her dream of fame. The block is run by hard-nosed matron Mama Morton, Queen Latifah, who loves her charges and will do anything for some of them, including her favorite Velma. While Roxy's in jail, her husband, Amos, John C. Reilly, remains as faithful as ever despite the hint that he's no longer wanted, except as a ploy. Being a musical, Chicago needs its tune-filled numbers to act as storytelling points and, overall, the breadth of the story is told in them. From the opening number and All That Jazz to the closing nowadays, each number is crisp, original and fun. The film itself takes place in real settings for the most part, with several shifts in scene to a nightclub where the band leader, played by Taye Diggs, introduces each subject as if it were a vaudeville act. This unique approach makes Chicago one of the most original films in recent memory. Much like its musical predecessor Moulin Rouge, Chicago helps revive a genre that has been long missing from the filmmaking world. These musicals, however, have done different things for the scene, bringing the formerly long-winded narratives to a modern audience in a fast-paced, interesting way. As Evita proved, the long, history-sprawling epic musical, while as enjoyable as it always was, has fallen into a place lost to memory. Musical numbers are important, but it's the performances of those singing that helps Chicago achieve greatness. Zellweger shows us a side she's never displayed, one that is risque and dangerous with a hint of that innocence that made her a success. Zeta-Jones strips off the fancy gowns and romantic style and gives us a gritty and tantalizing portrayal of the murderous Velma Kelly, a role that most would never have imagined. Fighting it out for best female performance of the film is the equally talented Latifah, who gives haunting portrayal of a lonely prison matron who must live her life vicariously through her prisoners. The feminine side of the film is quite impressive, but so is the masculine. Gere, whose recent performances have been wooden and unenergetic, is here dazzling as the witty lawyer whose own clients are sometimes smarter than he is. His opening number saying he's only in the business for love is a crowd-pleasing and surprising performance. Hard to top any of the performances, The best act in the entire film is the fantastic Riley as the embittered husband who unknowingly acts as a pawn for Billy and Roxy's defense plea. His piece acts as the emotional anchor for the picture. His is the role that remains human to a fault. His singular performance of Mr. Cellophane is incredibly touching, giving the audience a true understanding of what the people who take the back tent at the media circus go through. Director Rob Marshall made some excellent choices in his rendering of Bill Condon's adaptation of the Bob Fosse and Fred Ebb musical. With music by John Kander and lyrics by Fred Ebb, Marshall turns Chicago into a mesmerizing glance at a history where women were killing their husbands and just starting to face the music for their deeds. His choice of blending stage settings and real-world locales is original and clever. Chicago is a fun and glorious romp through the Prohibition era with a bevy of talented individuals. The entire show is a crowd-pleasing success that revitalizes a film style that should never have abetted. See. Murder isn't terrible, especially if the victim was doing things far worse like lying, being unfaithful, or popping their gum annoyingly. Chicago is directed by Rob Marshall, who would go on to direct other musicals like Nine and Into the Woods. The film was written by Bill Condon and is adapted from the stage musical of the same name by Bob Fosse. It stars Renée Zellweger as Roxy Hart, a housewife who dreams of stardom as a jazz singer. Her lover, Dominic West, has promised to use his connections in the business to help her get her start, but when she finds out he has been lying just to get her in bed, she guns him down in a fit of rage. Meanwhile, famous Chicago club singer Velma Kelly, Catherine Zeta-Jones, has also been locked up for committing murder when she found her sister in bed with her husband. Once in prison, Roxy and Velma fight over the spotlight and for the attention of defense attorney Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, who has never lost a case. In modern Oscars history, it's not often that musicals win Best Picture. Chicago was the first musical to win this highest honor in 34 years, and the last musical to do so before this was Oliver. In 1968, though that streak was broken for about 90 seconds in 2017 when La La Land was mistakenly announced the winner for that category. Though some people believe Chicago is not worthy of such praise, we personally think it is a fantastic movie full of tremendous acting, fabulous direction, and amazingly vibrant, colorful visuals and costumes. It is worth watching for the eye candy alone. It is also loaded with some terrific music, featuring songs like All That Jazz, When You're Good to Mama, and Mr. Cellophane, among many others. There are some enjoyable performances from Renée Zellweger, John C. Reilly, and Queen Latifah, who were all rightfully nominated for Academy Awards for their acting accomplishments. Also splendid is Catherine Zeta-Jones, who actually took home an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress and was very deserving of such an accolade. She and Zellweger have excellent chemistry with one another as they battle back and forth for a center stage place in the spotlight and vie for the love of their adoring fans. Zellweger and Zeta-Jones prove their talents over and over again here, and their performances impress the hell out of us each and every time we watch this film. The story is intriguing, provocative, and salacious. It's got an engaging message about the justice system and the circus of the media machine, and it's sure to keep you intrigued from start to finish in every aspect. At the time of its release, Rob Marshall's take on Kander and Ebb's jazz age musical, Chicago, was somewhat maligned though popular and award-winning with it, not least of all by myself as a fan of the stage show. Now, some years later, revisiting the film while on a plane, has led me to a slight reappraisal. For those who've missed out until now, the film follows the story of a pair of murderesses in 1920s Chicago and their attempt to not only get declared innocent but find their place in the limelight of the city's jazz club scene. What really stands out here is the cast, with Renée Zellweger, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Richard Gere all arguably at their celebrity zenith. It's hard to separate their characters from their real-life selves, but in a way that plays into the themes of the story which embody the phrase "all publicity is good publicity" in about the most extreme and literal way possible. They are joined by various supporting players, most notably Queen Latifah and John C. Reilly, who are easier to disassociate from their real-world selves. Of course this is a musical, so where it's really going to need to work is in how that translates to the screen, and it's a mixed bag. It's clear Marshall has a strong idea in creating something a little like cabaret by setting the song and dance numbers in a kind of heightened world and the dialogue scenes in the real world. While this often looks good, and leads to some nice transitions and great stylistic shifts to bring the stage version's costumes and sets onto the screen, it doesn't quite work for one very important reason. The supposedly real world is also a heightened one. It's not quite Sin City levels of comic book noir, but it's heading that way, and it's certainly got a Pulp Fiction quality to it that makes it more than normal, so a lot of the contrast of the sword scene in Cabaret is lost. On top of this, the performances from the three leads never quite gel. Zeta-Jones in far and away the best all-rounder of the three, but Zellweger remains intensely unlikable throughout, while Gere looks to be phoning it in a lot of the time, though he has a few standout moments when we reach the courtroom, and you don't get the impression he's ever trying to hide that he's more actor than song and dance man. A big factor in this, I think, is the way the musical numbers are shot, with the actors focusing so much on lip-syncing and dancing they don't have the time to act as well, which makes them fall a bit flat. Musical performance of this nature is always a challenge, given it combines three separately disciples at once, four if you add in committing it to film, and none of the three quite hit the mark. Actually, it's Latifah and Riley who manage this better, but then they only have one big number each. Marshall's Chicago then has a lot going for it, particularly in look and style, but ultimately falls somewhat short, making it not the disaster I remembered, but far from the triumph a great Hollywood musical and Best Picture Oscar winner should be. The Best Picture winner at the 75th Academy Awards is a curious case, full of contradictions and nuances and dualities. It's a Broadway adaptation with flat, stagey direction by Rob Marshall, a TV movie director. Yet, it features some of the most iconic and riveting musical number productions of the past quarter century. The editing is, on the one hand, jarringly hyperactive, obfuscating choreography and any sense of space, as if Marshall and editor Martin Walsh learned all the wrong lessons from Moulin Rouge. Yet, the film rightly won the Best Editing Oscar for its monumental, almost impressionistic clash between diegetic and artificial mice and scenes, adding a rich dimension to the film that would simply be impossible on stage. The story is full of unpleasant characters who do unpleasant things while still pulling some of its nastiest punches. Why introduce Queen Latifah as a sexually domineering warden but give her nothing to do? Yet, it's one of the most potent and incisive satires of the 21st century. Chicago is, in other words, equal parts frustrating and transcendent. It's a powerfully stirring film, but also one that feels like it doesn't quite reach its potential. The film tells the story of Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, an aspiring entertainer who kills her secret lover after he dumps her. After she's arrested, she finds herself dueling with Velma Kelly, Catherine Zeta-Jones, to be Queen Bee of the cell block. She recruits notorious attorney Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, to defend her, and he does so by relentlessly manipulating the media and narrative so that the jury buys her as the victim of a woman-exploiting society. Gere and Zeta-Jones are best in show. Zeta-Jones won an Oscar for The Turn, and it's hard to blame the Academy. She is absolutely dazzling and screen-controlling, embodying the film's themes of weaponized feminism and image-driven self-definition. Gere is her peer, though, hopping off the screen with razor-sharp charisma and chops. If you're going to nominate Zeta-Jones, why not him? Zellweger, too, is great in the lead, though somehow the third most interesting performance. Shout out to Lucy Liu, who delivers a jaw-dropping 3-minute cameo. The film's numbers are of inconsistent quality, but the highs are extremely memorable. Everybody remembers Cell Block Tango. It's the film's thematic mission statement and also its biggest earworm, with some eye-popping use of red. I tip my hat even more to Gere's They Both Reached for the Gun, which turns a press conference into a marionette puppet show. The film has a thick layer of satire about the performative, malleable power of media, and it rings resonant in 2022. It's not hard to draw a straight line between the murder trials in this film, based on true stories, and Trump's 2016 win nearly a century later. It all is brimming with energy and life, but it feels held back by Marshall's lack of intuition on constructing a coherent and visually appealing scene. Marshall had only made TV movies prior to this, and has made mostly stinkers by reputation since. I haven't seen any. It seems he struck lightning with cast and material and fresh ideas without much nuts and bolts technique to back it up. Chicago is an exciting visual experience that gives me a lot of mixed feelings scene to scene and number to number, but one that's essential viewing, warts and all. On December 27, 2002, Rob Marshall's musical Chicago debuted in theaters on its way to award season glory. The film, starring Renée Zellweger and Catherine Zeta-Jones, claimed 6 Oscars at the 75th Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The Hollywood Reporter's original review is below. After a seemingly endless gestation period, this cinematic adaptation of the Kander and Ebb Broadway musical hit has finally arrived and fortunately delivers the sexy razzle-dazzle that everyone, especially movie musical fans, has been hoping for. An even more accessible and substantial screen musical than last year's Moulin Rouge, and not nearly as headache-inducing, the movie version of Chicago is a screen triumph that should ride critical kudos and award recognition to significant commercial success, though its potential could be limited by the inherent darkness of the material and less than likable main characters. Chicago, as staged by Bob Fosse, was a Broadway hit upon its initial 1975 production, but it was with its 1996 revival, now the longest running in Broadway history, that it truly entered the public consciousness. The material, of course, has been around forever. Based on a 1926 play, it has already been adapted twice for the movies, albeit in non-musical form. It tells the sordid tale of Roxy Hart, Zellweger, a struggling dancer-singer in Prohibition-era Chicago who goes on trial for the shooting death of her lover. Her rival for the public's ever-shifting attentions is equally homicidal showgirl Velma Kelly, Zeta-Jones, and her lawyer is the ever-shifty, slick Billy Flynn, Richard Gere. The themes of media exploitation and the public's embracing of glamorous criminals is, unfortunately, still all too relevant. Kander's and Ebb's musical version is done in a highly theatrical, indeed, vaudevillian style, which threatened to be highly difficult to adapt for the screen. Director Rob Marshall, making an auspicious big screen debut, and screenwriter Bill Condon have solved the inherent structural and credibility problems much as Fosse did in his highly similar film adaptation of another Kander and Ebb classic, Cabaret. In that film, Fosse removed the standard songs from the show and instead presented all of the musical numbers as taking place in the Kit Kat Club. Here, the idea is that a realistic depiction of Roxy's plight is juxtaposed with musical numbers that are figments of her imagination, many of them introduced by a band leader, Taye Diggs, all too reminiscent of Joel Grey's menacing MC. The concept is quite effective, making the material palatable even to those easily turned off by standard musicals. Helping matters greatly is the brilliantly jazzy and brassy musical score, featuring one standout number after another. There was great concern about the unlikely casting choices, but they have paid off. The lead performers, who have clearly worked very, very hard, handle both their dramatic and musical chores with aplomb. Zellweger, who certainly doesn't spring to mind as a musical diva, is a terrific Roxy, well conveying the sordid aspects of her cheating, murdering character even while maintaining her inherent appeal. And, while she won't erase anyone's stage memories of Gwen Verdon, or Anne Reinking in the revival, she proves more than capable in the song and dance department. Speaking of that, while it's deeply unfortunate that Bebe Neuwirth wasn't given the opportunity to repeat her stage triumph, Zeta-Jones is a sexy, funny Velma, though the character has been somewhat relegated to supporting status. Gere, again not someone associated with musical comedy, his early stage career did include a stint as Danny Zuko in Grease, is a first-rate Billy Flynn, even if it's hard not to imagine how glorious someone like Gene Kelly would have been in the role years ago. His still dashing good looks and charisma, not to mention his ability to convey a smarmy quality, serve him well here, and it's a pleasure to see him working his comedic muscles again. Queen Latifah proves inspired casting as the scheming matron Morton, scoring big with her lavish number When You're Good to Mama. It's a shame, though, that one of her character's best numbers, Class, has been cut. John C. Reilly is superbly pathetic as Roxy's cuckolded husband, Amos, and his number Mr. Cellophane is one of the film's highlights. Christine Baranski is a delight as a rapacious reporter, Lucy Liu has an entertaining cameo as yet another female murderer, and Chita Rivera, the musical's original Velma, has a welcome but all too brief cameo. Marshall, a veteran stage director/choreographer who proved his cinematic skills with his television adaptations of the musicals Cinderella and Annie, does a superb job here, beautifully contrasting the gritty storyline with the hard-edged musical numbers. From the opening All That Jazz to the torrid cell block tango to the finale, Nowadays/Hot Honey Rag, the screen pulses with musical energy, and he has well realized such concepts as having the reporters being depicted as marionettes during Roxy's news conference. If there's one fault to be found in the direction, it's an all too common one in this MTV era: too much cutting and too many camera angles. Too often, Marshall fails to trust the inherent value of simplicity as taught by such musical screen masters as Astaire and Kelly. Particularly egregious is Gere's tap dance number, which is shot so choppily it resembles an outtake from Flashdance. On the other hand, Marshall's choreography pays suitable homage to Fosse while managing to be highly effective on its own terms. Rob Marshall's film version of the Jazz Age musical takes us right back to an era of high living, nightclubs, sexual decadence, teetering on the abyss of financial ruin, the 1970s. The original show, with book by Fred Ebb and Bob Fosse, premiered on Broadway in 1975, 3 years after the release of Bob Fosse's barnstorming movie Cabaret. In fact, the whole style of this movie, its staging, its photography, and choreography, looks very much as if nothing much has changed in the intervening 30 years. But it isn't exactly Cabaret the film resembles. What this looks like is a sort of grown-up version of Bugsy Malone, that very entertaining but strangely knowing 1976 kiddie musical by Alan Parker, starring Jodie Foster in the most adult role she's ever had in her life. If you don't believe me, do an image search on the internet and compare Renée Zellweger in this movie to the youngster Florrie Duggar in Bugsy, playing the goody two-shoes heroine Blousey. Really very similar, down to the pert blonde do and not entirely intentional air of cluelessness. The same tone of naughty but nice criminality and locale raunchiness prevails throughout Chicago, suitable for the coach parties and weekend breakers flocking to the current London West End stage revival. Putting their best hoof and feet forward are Zellweger, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Richard Gere. Renée plays Roxy Hart, the hard-working gal who dreams of showbiz glory. A no-good lowlife uses her sexually and tries to dump her, so she fills him full of lead. Pending trial, Roxy winds up in the women's prison, meeting ubervamp Velma Kelly, a nightclub chanteuse who has just handed her sister a one-way ticket to violent Deathville for fooling around with her husband. Catherine Zeta-Jones impersonates her in a Louise Brooks bob, looking sleek and sexy and about 8 feet tall. Finally there is the pewter-haired, crinkle-eyed heartbreaker himself, Richard Gere, filling his chalk-striped, double-breasted suit and snap-brimmed fedora as if to the manner born. He plays Billy Flynn, an appallingly venal criminal lawyer who specializes in this kind of case, adept not merely at manipulating juries but credulous newspapermen as well, spinning them sensational tales to create the publicity and marketing deals which are going to pay his monster fee. He's Clarence Darrow and Max Clifford rolled into one. Chicago is a very difficult show to open out cinematically, for the simple reason that it's almost entirely set in a prison, imprisoned there, in fact. And Marshall often elects simply not to open it out. For great swathes of time, it looks like a very expensively filmed record of the theater production on a giant sound stage, rather than a living, breathing film on its own account. The sleazy dance numbers sometimes happen on a fantasy level, inside Roxy's or Velma's head. The wild abandon of the chorus line will be debunked by their sudden absence as one of the leading ladies leans across an ordinary, smoky room to insinuate something. It's all just pretend. Which is stretching things a bit, considering that the musical convention of bursting into song is pretend in the first place. But what glorious songs! Razzle dazzle, all that jazz, these are show tunes with nuclear warheads. Chicago doesn't have the visual flair and invention of Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge, but what it does have are these show-stopping musical numbers, properly embedded in the fabric of the show itself. They're not, as in Luhrmann, a miscellaneous bunch of old pop tunes, but wonderful original classics. I laugh out loud every time I hear the cheeky lines from Razzle Dazzle, give them an act with lots of flash in it / and the reaction will be passionate. That's a rhyme Byron would have been proud to write. John C. Reilly plays Amos, Roxy's poor, deluded schmuck of a husband, and with his hangdog, victim face, he's ideal casting. Marshall throws away some of his song Mr. Cellophane, he isn't allowed to get to the end of it uninterrupted so that we get the full pathetic effect of him whimpering, "Thanks for listening." Great song, though. These are unstoppable numbers, not enough on their own, however, to get a film into orbit. And after seeing the principals strut their stuff, striking choreographed poses with one knee bent and hat tipped with devilish sexiness over one eye, you begin to suspect a whiff of naff. Or if not that, then sameness, familiar looking shots of supposedly lush nightclubs with a single spotlight in which the dust motes are circling, the camera doing an adoring and celebratory swirl around a leading lady as she belts out the final note, and it's all sugar-coated with ersatz glam sleaze and unthreatening toughness. It isn't that anyone's neglecting to give 101% or that there isn't loads of fun to be had in the set pieces. Richard Gere has a terrific moment when he tap dances his way out of a tight spot in court, and into the jury's affections. But that works because the action is happening outside the prison, it has removed to another location in the blink of an eye. In short, where it starts to look like a film. I left feeling that this had been unambitious and a bit of a missed opportunity. But Chicago is a very good bet for those who don't have the leisure to make it to London for the stage show, and want a reliable, cheaper ticket price approximation with, mostly, proper Americans in the cast. I don't even know how to begin expressing the feelings I have for this film, I simply have to say I loved it. This film has succeeded on every possible level I dreamed of and a few more to my pleasant surprise. I work in the film industry and get to see a lot of films that are praised to the roof and usually are just. Chicago could have gone wrong in so many ways and for many reasons. The road this project has taken has lasted more than 20 years, including the death of its creator, Bob Fosse, cast and director changes and so on. It's truly a miracle that this film was ever made. I saw it last night at the Ziegfeld Theater, the most beautiful movie house in New York, which was crawling with fags and faggots. It was truly like a circuit party from hell. Once the lights went down, the cruising ceased and the place was at attention. The film takes place in a roaring 1920s Chicago ruled by liquor jazz, sleazy tabloid journalism and a few good murders for good measure. Having seen the Broadway version twice a few years ago, I knew the premise and all the songs hard. Catherine Zeta-Jones plays Velma Kelly, a huge cabaret star busted for the double murder of her sister and husband. The three of them did an act together. She caught the two of them doing number 17, The Spread Eagle, and rest was history. Catherine Zeta-Jones is nothing short of a revelation from the moment she walks into the club and takes the stage to sing all that jazz. She owns the role. I have always liked her but never felt she really lived up to her potential in a film. She sings and dances like she's been doing it all her life. She blew me away. Renée Zellweger plays Roxy Hart, a girl who desperately wants to be a star like her idol Velma, but she's trapped in a loveless marriage to a loser, wonderfully played by John C. Reilly. She cheats on him with a guy who promises to introduce her to some producers and promoters. When he finally confesses that IR=T was all a sham just to screw her, she flips out and shoots his lying. Her chump of a husband initially takes the blame in order to protect her but blows it when he can't keep his story straight. Roxy ends up in the slammer right alongside Velma. Renée Zellweger is amazing in her multi-layered performance of Roxy. She is alternately desperate, earnest, feisty, catty, and sexy. She's also a hell of a singer. Who knew? In jail, Roxy and Velma are taken under the wing of Mama Morton. She runs the place, played with great sass by Queen Latifah. I hope she wins the Globe and an Oscar nod. Mama helps Roxy get the best lawyer a crime can buy, Billy Flynn, played by Gere. Damn. He's one of the few men who seems to get hotter with age. I love that gray hair, and he can sing and tap dance as well. He eventually gets both Roxy and Velma off in scheme too bizarre to explain here. Velma and Roxy forge a reluctant bond, they hate each other, and go on to become huge media stars. Go figure. The movie musical has been dead since classics like Grease disappeared from the marquee, and unbearable oddities such as Xanadu and the Village People's Can't Stop the Music appeared in its place. There was one attempt in 1992 to resurrect the beloved feelings that these films evoked when Disney introduced its high-concept megaflop, Newsies, about the paperboy strike in turn-of-the-century New York. The film failed to remind critics or audiences of how special a musical can be. Since then, this famed genre has rested, awaiting a film to signal its rebirth. Like a shot of adrenaline pounded straight into the heart, Chicago is the musical that devotees have dreamt of for more than 2 decades. Unlike the winningly hyperkinetic Moulin Rouge, which brought the modern musical into today's mainstream by juicing it up with pop hits, Chicago does not try to update the genre. The film is unabashedly old-fashioned without being corny or cliched, because the themes of greed and corruption are timeless. The 30s still seem fresh thanks to director Rob Marshall's approach to the story. Based on the popular Broadway show, Chicago begins with a bang, literally, as seductive songstress Velma Kelly, the always stunning Catherine Zeta-Jones, rushes into the club where she has become a nighttime sensation after murdering her sister and husband, who had been carrying on an affair while the sisters were part of a double act. After a spectacular rendition of all that jazz, Kelly is arrested in front of the crowd. One of the admirers who witnesses it all is Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, an unfaithful housewife who hopes that she can find a man to get her into the entertainment business. Sometime later, while having an affair with a furniture salesman, Dominic West, whom she believes has connections, she discovers that he had lied to make his way into her pants. As any angry woman would do, she kills him. So she is hauled off to a women's correctional facility to await trial. There she encounters Ms. Kelly once more and is introduced to Billy Flynn, Gere, a hotshot lawyer who could turn lead into gold. Already defending Ms. Kelly, Billy decides to take on Roxy's case, seeing the potential for mass publicity and cash flow. Because both women have suitably transformed into publicity hounds, a feud begins between Velma and Roxy. The glitz, glamour, and every sleazy but joyfully entertaining moment all add up to this wonderfully flashy film. The musical has always been the type of film that should expect a physical reaction from the audience if it were done right. Like laughter to a comedy, a musical is supposed to make you want to sing and dance along with the cast or, for that matter, the audience. I was repeatedly tempted to jump up and down with joy that such a film could be created. Chicago is magnificently staged, too. The slippery, dangerously sexy moves of Bob Fosse remain intact as every dance becomes about seduction, where backstabbing and betrayals are celebrated, and sex is currency. In chipper, satirical numbers, such as We Both Reached for the Gun, the manipulation of the media-hungry public is shown in all of its artificial glory. Every opportunity to make the film as lively and joyous as possible is never overlooked. As a result, you may have to give in to temptation and start dancing in the aisles. It's rare to find a picture as exuberant, as shallow, and as exuberant about its shallowness as the director Rob Marshall's film adaptation of the Broadway musical Chicago. It's the raw expenditure of energy and the canniness of the staging that should pull audiences in and keep them rooted. The fabulous bones of this oft-told tale have been picked over so often that there's no flesh left on them. But Mr. Marshall and the screenwriter Bill Condon get a terrifically sweet concoction out of this fabled skeleton. The movie, set in Prohibition-era Chicago, is tough, brittle fun, a mouthful. Mercilessly adapted by Mr. Condon, who won an Oscar for his Gods and Monsters script. This Chicago has a connoisseur's appreciation of camp, which it treats as a dish best served cold. This, of course, is undoubtedly the best way to present a movie take on Bob Fosse's digressive musical version of Chicago, itself a song and dance spin on the 1926 play by Maureen Dallas Watkins. Her original Chicago had made it to the screen twice, most notably as 1942's Roxy Hart, one of the finest comedies of that era. A bit of intriguing trivia, Roxy Hart starred Ginger Rogers, but it wasn't a musical. This new picture maintains the relentless spirit of Fosse's blunt suavity and the breathless, black silk enthusiasm of Candor and Ebb's songs. In other words, Chicago is as tough as Roxy, Renée Zellweger, turns out to be. Her Roxy is on trial on a murder charge, accused of killing a man, Dominic West, who took advantage of her. Mr. Marshall's movie makes her more of a victim initially, tumbling from a happy romp into the lurid terror of violation. His adaptation plays on the audience's affection for Ms. Zellweger's scrappy Cupid doll with a heart image before exposing the knowing smirk and steel-jacketed ambition looming beneath Roxy's dimples. The picture saves her chameleon aspect for later, turning her spunky, spiky naif on her head. Instead of spreading goodwill, she pimps for it. As the press coverage of Roxy's trial grows, her own sense of self inflates, she gets hooked on cheap, easy fame. The retread nature of the material, centering on America's thrill-hungry, low-attention span press and public, is undeniable. This hoary attack on sensationalism has been covered in almost every newspaper picture of the 1930s, from Five Star Final, 1931, to Nothing Sacred, 1937. Fosse heated up the action by making Chicago about predatory sex and wild justice. Turning the tawdriness of Roxy's murder trial into a brash campaign for fame and allure, Fosse's Chicago, which jumped from one roof-raising number to another, broadcast the crass, manipulative motives of everyone involved. The sinewy, exposed skin of the dancers provided a jaw-plummeting contrast to the cold callousness of the characters. Mr. Marshall and Mr. Condon try something different. This movie, choreographed by Mr. Marshall, may be accused of being inspired by Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge. It cranks up the temperature by flashing more thigh than Kentucky Fried Chicken, generating excitement with bullet-timed editing and brassy, hip-shaking musical numbers that openly comment on what has come before as well as advancing the story. Dennis Potter's Pennies from Heaven, with its cold-hearted Brechtian observational style, is a big influence, too. The trial and everything leading up to it are treated in Mr. Marshall's picture like backstage preparation. It provides standard dialogue exchanges for the cast members so their beady-eyed grasping is obvious. For the eruption of the musical numbers, the movie pops inside Roxy's head, the ID-free world of her unconscious, where the songs are sung out and the dances are flung out. Back in the real world, the competition grows between Roxy and Velma, Cather and Zeta-Jones, for the public's attention and constantly diminishing concentration. Velma is a jazz baby stage performer who is also doing time and anxious about being upstaged, especially when both her life and her public profile may be at stake. Mr. Condon may have also gone back to the prefatory material that Watkins wrote for her Chicago, which details a chunk of the actual history of the crimes that inspired the show. Chicago was a tough movie to make. Fosse, laboring to get it done since he brought it to the stage in 1975, finally gave up on it. Instead, he transplanted some of the plot machinations and several of the show's songs to the movie All That Jazz, 1979. His expressionist slink dance style has turned up everywhere but the Christian Broadcasting Network in the interim. But Fosse's death in 1987 wasn't enough to derail a filmed Chicago. And with the exception of Wilma Flintstone, almost every female star of the last 20 years who ever sang a note or dreamed of it was mentioned as a possible star on first sight of Ms. Zeta-Jones in Chicago. In her Louise Brooks wig and ruthless smile, it's hard not to be reminded of the limping musical she was seen rehearsing in last year's comedy America's Sweethearts with the same vocal equipment. But not since she used that martial form of Pilates to slither through a series of electronic alarms in Entrapment, 1999, has she shown the kind of physicality she displays here. She pumps her majestic, long legs like the cylinders of a Corvette about to redline, but always knowing exactly when to stop short of throwing a piston. Chicago has become more of Roxy's story, but that doesn't stop Mr. Marshall from supplying its cast with moments to, as Foss used to say, razzle-dazzle em. As the big-ticket defense lawyer and jury barometer Billy Flynn, Richard Gere has never been better, turning spoiled prince-sealing arrogance into a witty revel. He splashes his winner's juice sparingly, and the movie's shift from acid reality to bitter, high-flying musical serves him best. Queen Latifah, as the prison matron, has a number dripping with the honey of the young Bessie Smith. She and Mr. Gere are used for their bigger-than-life personae, and sudden pressure drops in those presences signal their duplicity. John C. Reilly is the opposite, the movie's conscience as Roxy's long-suffering husband, and his baggy pants Mr. Cellophane number is rueful and angry. Chicago, which opens nationally today, is also a Broadway baby's joy, with snappy cameos of theater performers, including the lovable Christine Baranski, who seems to bring a cheering section with her. To be sure, it's not the type of picture that lingers, and obviously some of the sting-like A/B editing is a mercy to Ms. Zellweger, whose float-like-a-butterfly voice doesn't triumph over her my left foot dance skills. The big finale featuring her and Ms. Zeta-Jones almost does what a jury can't, stop them cold. Until that scene, Ms. Zellweger's performance is alternately subtle and reptile, she can still win the day. Who would have expected Ms. Zellweger and Miramax to come through in a musical? And it's one of the few Christmas entertainments to run under 2 hours. Who couldn't love that? Chicago is rated PG-13, parents strongly cautioned. It has violence, and the strong language and sexuality, real and implied, befitting an old-school tabloid burlesque. Chicago, American musical film, released in 2002, that was based on Bob Foss's 1975 Broadway play, with songs by John Kander and Fred Ebb. The movie, directed and choreographed by Rob Marshall, was a popular and critical success, winning 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The movie begins with a performance by vaudeville star Velma Kelly, played by Catherine Zeta-Jones, who has just killed her sister and her husband after having caught them in bed together. The starstruck Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, is in the audience with her boyfriend, Fred Casely, Dominic West, who she believes has show business connections. A few nights later, Fred admits that he has no friends in the theater. An angry Roxy fatally shoots him. Her loving husband, Amos Hart, John C. Reilly, is willing to admit to the murder, but the police reveal the affair between Fred and Roxy. Amos subsequently recants, leading Roxy to confess. She is taken to jail, where she meets the matron Mama Morton, Queen Latifah, who will do favors for money, and where Velma is already imprisoned. Mama Morton recommends that Roxy choose Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, as her defense attorney, though Flynn is currently representing Velma. Amos hires Flynn, who concocts a story that Roxy is an innocent led astray and that she killed Casely in self-defense when he attacked her for remaining loyal to Amos. Flynn stages a press conference that makes a star of Roxy. Velma, upstaged, tries unsuccessfully to persuade Roxy to partner with her in her song and dance act when they are released. Kitty Baxter, Lucy Liu, a wealthy heiress accused of murdering her husband and 2 women after catching all 3 in bed together, arrives at the jail, stealing the spotlight from Roxy. The attention-seeking Roxy improvises a pregnancy, regaining the interest of Flynn and the press. Flynn convinces Amos that the baby is Casely's and that he must divorce Roxy. Roxy, unhappy with Flynn's request that she appear demure at the trial, fires him. However, upon learning that fellow inmate Hunyak, Yekaterina Chelkanova, has lost her appeal and has been executed, she rehires Flynn and follows his advice. At the trial, after a staged reconciliation between Amos and Roxy and after Roxy's testimony, it appears that she will be acquitted. However, Velma, who has been given Roxy's diary by Mama Morton and has agreed to testify in turn for the dismissal of the charges against her, is then called as a rebuttal witness. She reads passages that incriminate Roxy, who insists that she did not write them. Flynn accuses the prosecutor of forging the passages. Roxy is ultimately acquitted, and reveals to Amos that she is not actually pregnant, but her victory is forgotten when a woman shoots a man on the courthouse steps. Roxy later fails an audition, but Velma is waiting in the wings, and the two collaborate in a successful jazz partnership. The film's plot was inspired by two Chicago women who, in 1924, were accused and later acquitted of having murdered their lovers. Crime reporter Maureen Watkins covered the stories for the Chicago Tribune, and she wrote a play about the women in 1926. The following year a film adaptation, also called Chicago, was released. The story inspired another movie, Roxy Hart, 1942, with Ginger Rogers in the title role. The Broadway play Chicago, the first musical based on Watkins' story, premiered in 1975. The production was directed and choreographed by Bob Fosse, and it starred Gwen Verdon, Chita Rivera, and Jerry Orbach. The musical's Broadway revival, beginning in 1996, was a smash hit and far more successful than the 1975 version. Chicago was the first movie directed by Rob Marshall. A film version of Bob Fosse's 1975 musical Chicago has been on the back burner in Hollywood for years. The 1996 Broadway revival with Bebe Neuwirth made the buzz even bigger, with Madonna and other actresses briefly reported to be involved. But still, nothing came of these starts, and the film probably owes finally getting made to the popularity of Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge. The nice surprise is how much better a film Chicago is than Moulin Rouge. The choreography is strongly translated from the late Fosse's stage version to the screen, and the songs work in the context of the story in a way the music of Moulin Rouge never really did. This project was apparently offered to Luhrmann before he did Moulin, but he demurred, saying he could never do Fosse justice. Chicago is a story of music and murder and tabloid fame set in the end of the jazz age, but its story is even more trenchant with today's everyone's a celebrity mindset. Renée Zellweger and Catherine Zeta-Jones play Roxy Hart and Velma Kelly, singers who get arrested for murder and use the attending celebrity of their trials to further their musical careers. Velma is already a star, but Roxy is a less talented wannabe. However, the tables get turned when Roxy's story of a proper country girl seduced by jazz and liquor steals the spotlight from flapper Velma's crime of passion. They are both represented by silver-tongued lawyer Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, a shameless but charming showman who will do anything to get his clients off, and to keep himself in the headlines. The biggest surprise here is what a damned good singer and dancer Catherine Zeta-Jones is. Her take on Velma Kelly is a stunning success, capturing both the hardened bitterness of the woman and the spectacular talent that made her a star to begin with. Renée Zellweger's song and dance abilities are more earthbound. She can sing and dance pretty well but not spectacularly. But that works with her character, a woman of modest talent who relies on notoriety for a song and dance career because she can't get it on her talent alone. Other surprises are the vocals by Queen Latifah as Big Mama, the head of the cell block, and John C. Reilly, who does a surprisingly supple turn on his spotlight tune Mr. Cellophane. Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, wants to be on the stage, but is in a tedious life married to a boring mechanic, Amos, John C. Reilly. When she discovers the man she is having an affair with is not only unable to get her an audition, but is going to leave her, she shoots him and is quickly arrested for murder. She joins Velma Kelly, Catherine Zeta-Jones, a famous singer and dancer who killed her husband and sister after she caught them in bed together. The two use Mama Morton, Queen Latifah, to obtain the legal services of Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, to set them free. And all this whilst singing and dancing. I have no idea if this is a good film or not. It certainly is a very interesting interpretation of a stage show to film, with it flowing from cabaret performances in a club to scenes of reality. What I know is the music is fabulous. The other thing is that we did Chicago as a high school performance long before the recent stage, and then film, revival, and I still know pretty much every word of every song. It was just as well that there was no one home at my place and my neighbors were away, because I watched the film singing at the top of my lungs. And no one needs to hear that. Chicago won Oscar for Best Picture, Best Actress in a Supporting Role, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Best Art Direction, Set Decoration, Best Costume Design, Best Film Editing and Best Sound. Chicago was nominated for Best Actress in a Leading Role, Renée Zellweger, Best Actor in a Supporting Role, John C. Reilly, Best Actress in a Supporting Role, Queen Latifah, Best Director, Rob Marshall, Best Writing, Adapted Screenplay, Bill Condon, Best Cinematography and Best Music, Original Song, I Move On. Musicals aren't my favorite fare. I like Bob Fosse movies, though. Cabaret, All That Jazz, Chicago. Wait a sec. Bob Fosse is dead. He didn't do Chicago the movie, he did Chicago on the stage. I knew there was a reason this felt like a lesser movie. Now to say this is a lesser movie, well, it's like saying that History of the World, Part I is a lesser comedy than Young Frankenstein. It's unfair to compare a masterpiece to a movie that's not great, but still good. Of course, Chicago is not the same thing people saw on Broadway, and I'm sure it was a challenge to adapt a theatrical piece to an audiovisual medium like film. Bill Condon, who also succeeded with Dreamgirls, wrote the screenplay, but I wonder how much of his work was kept in the shooting script. The acting is average, except Richard Gere is obviously having a ball, and he infects us with his joy. The only things that saved this movie were Gere's performance, the music, and the choreography. Rob Marshall, the director of the movie version of Chicago, is not Bob Fosse, the king of sexy dance. Marshall is a studio director. Not a bad director, just someone who knows where to place the camera without the movie jump cutting. He serves his purpose. But I didn't like the way he filmed the musical numbers, which, in my opinion, should be more music than anything else. However, the film keeps jumping in between the narrative and a character performing a musical number on a stage in front of an audience. I liked the music and dancing a lot and didn't like it constantly being interrupted. I would have preferred straight up song and dance numbers. And that's about it. I usually try to offer more in-depth thought than this, but Chicago is a blah kind of movie. Just like Marshall, the film simply serves its purpose. I was satiated and entertained, but my cup did not overflow it, so to speak. I expected more of that wowing razzle-dazzle I've come to expect from Fosse's material. It's not his fault, though. While I'd recommend the movie for a rainy Sunday afternoon, when I watched it, you're still probably better off watching a Fosse movie to see the original master at work. Within the first 5 seconds of the musical number that opens the film adaptation of Chicago, director Rob Marshall has established such a sublimely vivacious speakeasy atmosphere of hot jazz, cigarette smoke, and showgirls that you'll feel as if you've been transported backstage at a posh 1920s cabaret. The scene crackles with seductive energy as vaudeville siren Velma Kelly, Catherine Zeta-Jones, prowls across the footlights with a phalanx of sexy dancers, cooing all that jazz in a voice that turns the men at the darkened tables around the stage into putty. And just for a second, wannabe song and dance girl Roxy Hart, Renée Zellweger, imagines herself up there in Velma's place. As the beautiful flapper Floozy stands in the shadows at the back of the theater, wide-eyed but reeking of wily ambition, Marshall, who directed the recent stage revival of Cabaret, shows us a flash of Roxy's imagination in which she's the fabulous star of the fabulous show, wearing a fabulously silver sequined waterfall dress, strutting and singing to wild applause. So vivid is the unmistakably cinematic experience this film creates, the exhilarating music, the personality-popping performances, the gorgeous cinematography and brilliantly creative precision editing which distinguish the movie from its stage inspiration, that within the first 5 minutes of Chicago I knew I was seeing the best movie of 2002. Reality, fantasy, and stage performance bleed into one another as the luminary Velma is arrested after catching her cheating husband and her co-star sister together and killing them. Simultaneously, Roxy naively sleeps with a con man who said he'd help her showbiz career, then commits her own murder when he cruelly tells her what he really thinks of her meager talents and slaps her down to the floor when she won't let him walk out the door. Soon both women are in jail, competing with all their showbiz acumen and feminine wiles for the attention of Billy Flynn, Richard Gere, the expensive, unbeatable, headline-grabbing celebrity lawyer who has taken both their cases but seems interested only in whichever one can be manipulated to generate the most publicity. Adapted for the screen by Oscar winner Bill Condon, Gods and Monsters, whose innovative alterations take full advantage of the cinematic medium, Chicago is a movie in which absolutely everything went right. Zeta-Jones, who starred in West End musicals before heading for Hollywood, is a showstopper as Velma, the vain, bob-haired vixen who is eventually reduced to proposing a post-trial stage partnership to the now more famous Roxy, thanks to Billy Flynn. In the surreal plane of Roxy's imagination, Velma's breathless prison-bound audition number begins with a piano player's introduction that goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Velma Kelly," in an act of desperation. Gere, who has always been adept at playing sleazy lawyers, acquits himself admirably in his musical numbers, especially in the irresistibly punchy "We Both Reached for the Gun," in which courthouse press conferences give way to Roxy's vision of herself as Flynn's ventriloquism dummy and the press corps as his marionettes. Queen Latifah plays prison matron Mama Morton as a voluptuous, wisecracking homage to Mae West, and puggish sad sack John C. Reilly gives one of the best performances of his career as Roxy's dope of a put-upon husband who is heartbreaking in his solo number, Mr. Cellophane, in which he laments being invisible to the world in the glare of Roxy's tabloid celebrity. But it's Zellweger's incredible presence as the ditzy, peroxide blonde Roxy that sucks you into Chicago, with her kisser lipsticked into a heart shape, her frizzy finger wave hair and her sultry, charcoal-shadowed doll eyes that encompass with complete credibility everything from nescience to ruthless calculations, sometimes all at once. This film, directed by Rob Marshall, screenplay by Bill Condon, based on Chicago, produced by Martin Richards, starring Renée Zellweger, cinematography Dion Beebe, edited by Martin Walsh, music by John Kander, production companies producer Circle Co. Distributed by Miramax Films. Release dates December 10, 2002. Running time 113 minutes. Countries United States. Language English. Budget $45 million. Box office $306.8 million.